folk singer, political activist, Joan Baez. She's had actually a fascinating life, documented in her new autobiography, Holds Up book.
Yeah, which is
And a voice to sing with, it's called. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I was going to say, we're going to see tomorrow at some length Barbara's thoughts about singing. She actually said that singing all the way along the line wasn't something in itself precious to her, merely a means to an end, in her case, acting. Is there any parallel with you there?
Singing is probably lots of things, but it's a great joy just to sing, and I'm sure it is for her as well. I mean, I wish I could open my mouth and have that come out as well. She's got an extraordinary equipment in her throat. But for me, then, it's also been a means to put across ideas that I felt were important. And you know, it's gotten me places in the world and opened doors for me to walk through, and for some reason or another, people still go on listening to what I have to say. So, yeah, it's been a means to an end as well.
She also said that she gets incredibly tense in any live performance. Was that ever the same for you?
It was the same, but I understand that she really stopped a lot of live performing because of that, and I sort of bashed on with it until that got better. I understand it can get worse as well, so I have heard that she has a bad
So you've never suffered in that direction?
I also have a pure, marvelous son. I think we have lots of things.
Oh, pure. He's absolutely pure, is he?
I was laughing. I say all that.
Pure, marvelous son?
Say all that stuff too, you know. He's 18.
He's 18. Yeah. Well, I suppose every mother does think that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We hope that purity remains when Mum's back's turned, by the way.
Oh,
all you sons out there.
Oh, I'm absolutely certain. I have no qualms at all.
Well, look, we've got plenty more talking to do. We're going to be talking about all the sorts of amazing things that you say in your autobiography. Also, you've got a concert coming up, haven't you?
I have on the 16th of March at Hammersmith Odeon.
Gosh.
What did you think of Mr. Swaggart's performance?
Oh, he's a marvelous performer. And he was my favorite out of all these clowns anyway, because he has the most fire. But it's also absolutely, I mean, I'm glad to see everybody in the studio in hysterics, because it's a sign of good mental health.
I suppose we should, in fairness, put the other point of view. That is that millions of Americans follow these people.
That was the cringing part, that I live over there and I can't.
People need
I suppose for need of something, which unfortunately we haven't found anything more substantial to replace. Because this is all nonsense.
I said when I was introducing that report that you're an evangelist of a sort, and I suppose you are, aren't you? I mean, you've had a message over the years. You've had particularly the non-violence message, and you've evangelized by singing it, and people have followed you and flocked to hear you and joined in with you.
It's the same thing as we were talking about earlier, and in the book, starting off the book with a very arrogant phrase, I was born gifted. But in fact, the gift, when it's considered a gift, is something you don't take pride for, because it's something that was given to you. And my attitude from a very early age was that as it was a gift to me, it was something to be shared with other people as well and as intelligently as possible.
What then do you see as your gift? You were saying it's not just the ability to sing, it's the ability to communicate, isn't it?
Well, it's ability to communicate, but it's also the desire to communicate. I mean, I'm sure there are probably lots of people who have talents, but if you don't turn that talent outward, and the gift to me is that I wanted to, and I've always enjoyed it and probably always will.
And where did that desire to communicate come from? I mean, you were brought up in a fairly, I mean, not that any family is ordinary,
normal.
but, you know, fairly normal,
Yes.
ordinary family.
Yeah. I don't know, well, I do know that a certain sense of caring about the brotherhood, sisterhood of women, of people, came from my parents, who became Quakers when I was very young. And in the Quaker Church, one takes very seriously concerns about other people who are less fortunate or who have less, and you also take very seriously the sanctity of life. You take that more seriously than anything else. And in the Quaker religion, you cannot remain a Quaker and join the army. You cannot remain a Quaker and become an armed revolutionary either. You have to leave the faith to do that, because we
so
really
non-violence was really there from your childhood?
Yeah, taken very seriously. And for whatever reasons, I didn't reject my parents. I did my share of revolting against everything, but I kept their values, because I think it has something to do with the way they lived their lives. They didn't just tell me things, they lived them.
The theory of non-violence was to a certain extent very unfashionable in parts of America at the time, and you suffered, didn't you? You went to prison. How much did that affect you?
Well, I didn't really suffer in prison, I must say. People do. I didn't particularly, because it was I was not treated badly and so on, so I really wouldn't count that too much. But I would say about nonviolence is generally a part of a movement. It certainly was part of us in the 60s were really concerned about nonviolence and
It's
interested
the big
in it.
university thing as well, wasn't it?
And, well, yeah, there were different things going on, but my interest has always remained with nonviolence. I mean, I'm fascinated with Mahatma Gandhi because although nonviolence is not a new concept, and a friend of mine said there was probably a caveman walking around who refused to carry a club and everybody called him a screwball. You know?
Others call them wives.
But the idea of organizing the decent side of human nature on a mass scale and using that for political change or for revolution was really new with
Fascinating.
Gandhi.
Have you seen the film?
Yes, several
Wonderful,
times.
isn't it?
Several times.
Yes, thought you'd enjoy that. We'll talk again in a few moments. We'll take a quick break.
Well, Giles has joined us, resplendent as ever, in a coat of many colours, and forming what he calls a spiritual alliance with Joan
Well,
Baez.
indeed, and given the success of the video churches in America, I thought if I wore a kind of cathedral today, people might begin to send me checks. And I'm quite ready to break down as well.
It's rather like a stained glass
It is
window,
supposed to
isn't
be
it?
a stained, if you don't mind me putting my
Quite all right.
arm in front of you, it is a sort of stained glass window. And isn't it beautiful?
Yeah.
And isn't Joan beautiful? It's most exciting to be sitting next to a living legend and
is.
find that she is actually a child.
Oh, my dear, do go on.
I'm ready to, but I have to first of all share the letters with the people, because this is what we call Postbag. Good morning, Britain. This is Postbag on Wednesday the 24th of February, the 55th day of the year, with just 267 shopping days left to Christmas. That's the good news, and believe it or not, Christmas shopping is already on the mind of one of our viewers, Olive Bailey of Guildford in Surrey. It's only February, and already my nephews and nieces have stopped playing with their Christmas presents. They cost a fortune, and clearly they were a complete waste of money. When I was a girl, I got given one simple present at Christmas, and I cherished it throughout the year. Modern children get far too much and take it all for granted. Well, if there are any children watching who may still be on half-term, waiting for Whack-A-Day, and you don't go along with Olive's line of thinking, do let us know. We've had a letter from an 11-year-old, Ruth Field of Martin in Blackpool, that seems to me spot on. You know how countries declare war? Well, why don't countries declare peace instead? If every country in the world decided to have a world peace and make a date for it to start on, it would be really great and nobody would get killed anymore. That is a brilliant concept, but I suspect a little too straightforward, a little too easy for the leaders of the world to grasp. Our viewers certainly include many a profound thinker and amateur philosopher. Your sage sayings continue to flood in. Listen now to Eric McGaskill of Elgin. Politics gets into a man when he has felt the sting of losing an argument. I don't quite know what it
So
means, do you?
all politicians are losers.
Yeah, it sounds rather good, doesn't it? Anyway, here's another old favourite from Mrs. Pam Ward of King's Lynn. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride.
Yes, I've heard that one.
This next one I particularly like. It comes from Glenys Tudor of Humberston. A pessimist is one who complains of the noise when opportunity knocks. I think it's rather nice. Oh, and looking completely...
Yeah, I was just trying, I've heard it a different way. Something like a pest, or if you're unlucky, if opportunity knocks and you're not in, or something.
That's
something
another,
like that.
That's
yeah.
another nice one. Yeah. Well, anyway, my pick of the day has been offered to us by Jackie Oldfield from Leeds. All are lunatics, but he who can analyse his delusion is called a philosopher.
Yes, that
Well,
is
your
nice.
thoughts on the human condition are warmly welcome at this address. Postbag, Good Morning Britain, TVam, Camden Lock, London, NW1 8TQ. And because it's Wednesday, this means that as well as letters, I've got a video to share with you. A romantic comedy, nicely timed for next Monday's leap year, when by tradition the ladies take the initiative, Joan. Yes, something actually...
Look interested, Joan, look interested.
Oh, she's so gorgeous and so exciting. Anyway, my problems are neither here nor there. Far from it. Neither here nor there are my problems. My video of the week is called Blind Date, the movie, with Kim Basinger in the Cilla Black role, and Bruce Willis as a businessman whose surprise encounter with gorgeous Kim leads to trouble and strife. There are chuckles here when you might want belters, but if you enjoy fairly light, occasionally chaotic, easy come, easy go comedy, this could be very much to your taste. I've got a clip just to give you a flavour. Here it comes now.
Nadia, how are you?
Walter Davis, rocket scientist. I'm thirsty.
Walter.
Hiya. Walter Davis, gynecologist.
Walter, I know these people.
Great, let's mingle.
Well,
What a place to leave her!
I really quite enjoyed that, but Mike was saying to me earlier that he enjoyed it much more than I did, and I was saying I think often how you enjoy a comedy particularly depends on the mood you came to it in. I know people who went to Venice, the most beautiful city on the planet Earth outside Solihull. And
outside Solihull?
Yes, indeed. You know there are more canals in Birmingham than there are in Venice. It's full of interest.
Most
All
of
the
them are blocked
riches
now.
are in this jewel of an island. But I know people who went to Venice and didn't enjoy it. And that's because they took their bad mood with them. And I think yesterday I may have been a bit tired when I watched it. So maybe it's better than I thought.
And your expectation was too great, perhaps?
Yes.
Giles, have you always been a Joan Baez fan?
I
Have you
have-
been rocking in the aisles along with We Will Overcome and all that business?
Of course I have.
Such a hot rock tune, wasn't it?
Oh, it still
But you
moves
could-
them there, doesn't
I'm
it?
a sort of natural peacenik.
Peacenicker.
Do you remember peacenik?
Beatniks.
People were called peaceniks in the 60s. Of course, this is before your time. That's the one thing that, of course, people can't really say to you.
Before your time.
Well, because you are, in some sense, as associated with the 60s. It's meant flatteringly. It's meant in a caring way.
It was very nice.
A
thank you.
warm and caring.
Well, it is actually, yes, one doesn't like to be insulting, but I was going to say to Giles, you know, when you're in university, I could imagine that you were always singing along to things like that. I mean, it grabbed
Played
everybody,
in the late
didn't it?
60s, you were,
In other words,
to be, but
you
were
are
a great cult figure.
you are the youth and the idealism of a generation, aren't you? You are.
That's sort of an embarrassing question.
But you are, aren't you?
Well, I've been called a variety of things. That's one of the nicer ones.
Yes, you have been called a variety of things too, because as Mike pointed out to you, your stance has often got you into trouble in your history, hasn't it?
Well, if you're going to open your mouth up and say anything, I have a friend in the entertainment world who wanted to get, quote, involved and sort of, quote, do something, but he couldn't figure out what. And finally, after years of this announcing this was the year he'd get involved, I finally said, what's holding you up? And he said, well, I really want to be involved, but I just don't want to do anything that's going to alienate anybody.
Oh,
And
well.
I said,
You
well,
can't do-
then
you
you
can't
know,
do
you
that,
might as
can
well
you?
just hang it up.
Might as well keep your mouth shut if you
Really
do
have
that.
to, because you will alienate somebody.
In your book, there are hints that the Joan Baez in the public eye was one kind of creature, but the Joan Baez behind those private doors had your problems, didn't you? You had worries that you weren't living up to that image.
Oh, yes, it's sort of I think most of us carry around great baggages of guilt about one thing or another and never think that we've done well enough at anything. And I think added to that a bit of the old puritanical background. Both of my grandfathers were preachers. One had left the Catholic Church and become a Methodist minister, and the other was Episcopalian. So there were these little threads of, you know, no matter what you did, it wasn't pure enough or good enough.
So what was the reaction of your family all the way along the line as you grabbed headlines and your picture appeared in the paper?
Well, I think that sort of came together all right. I think at the beginning, my dad was the one who was concerned. For instance, when I was 16 and we had an air raid drill, and this story is in the book, and in my high school, and we were supposed to all hide under our desks and then run home and sit in our cellars while the pretend missile came over from Moscow. And I was furious because I went and looked in my father's physics book and found out how long it would take for that missile and realized it was a hoax. We'd all get killed on the way home. So I stayed in school to protest that. Well, that was breaking the law. So my father really didn't like that. I mean, he discouraged me from doing that. Then after it was done, he weighed it all out, including the nasty articles in the newspaper and the glowing ones in the newspaper, and decided his little girl hadn't done badly after all, because it had listened here and listened here and then
that's
done
right.
it. So,
But sometimes it's just not as pleasant as it might be.
yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's less easy to accept. We're talking to Joan Baez, and we will be talking to her again in a couple of moments. Shall we leaf through some of the pictures
The
in the Joan
family
Baez
portrait.
family album? Exactly. First one is indeed the family, not looking at their best, I would say. What's the explanation behind those funny faces?
That was my father trying to take a serious picture of the 3 daughters and the wife. That's the explanation.
We have yearning in this country too.
So it's total non-cooperation with the photographer. there.
That was the beginning of our passive resistance. Yeah.
Yes, I see.
Not so passive.
Yeah, that's you on the right, I presume.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and there's you on the right again with Bob Dylan.
That's not from the book, though. You're
Is-
cheating.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, we looked out a better one, maybe. And so you actually, you almost no holds barred. You actually tell the story of you and Bob Dylan.
Well, I didn't remember him saluting me there. I think that's nice, don't you?
I think it's charming. It's a gesture.
Yes, it is a gesture of sorts.
Yes, right.
So you obviously just in talking about the Dylan affair in the book, you obviously don't mind talking about.
Well, you
that
should
part
see
of
what's
it.
on the cutting room floor.
Oh, really?
No, I tried to tried to tone things down a little bit, but I understand that I do understand that the way I write is extremely open, and I think I've sort of shocked the British just a tad with it. And in the States, apparently, it was open enough that the reactions to the book were either, "You've written a very honest book here, Miss Baez," or "You've written a very honest book here, Miss Baez," meaning, why did you put all that stuff in it?
It's very frank, is it?
It's a bit smutty. I think you'll like it, actually.
There you are, Giles, you never go.
I'll just see what page it falls open at. So I know Mike has been giving it close study.
Yes.
Yes.
Particularly pictures.
So there you are, some nice smutty revelations about Bob Dylan. Let's have a look at the next photograph. Martin Luther King.
Yes.
How well did you know him? Or was it
Well,
just
I
a-
knew him well enough to know that he was marvelously funny, and nobody ever got to see that because his job was such, he was under such strain. I think he
He was
felt
so
he
intense
wasn't
too,
supposed to share any of that publicly.
Was he a marvellous man to know?
I thought he was, yeah. We laughed and sang and cried and marched and all of those things.
Where were you
together.
when he died?
I was on the road somewhere on the East Coast, and I simply wouldn't cope with it. That whole story is in the book. I wouldn't deal with it, and I didn't pay any attention until about 8 years later. And I was watching a documentary on him, and I just went apart at the
That's
seams.
amazing, because most people remember exactly where they were and what they were doing when Kennedy died. And I think I do, particularly when Martin Luther King died too, and Bobby Kennedy. You presumably remember where you were, but as you say, you just refused to accept it.
I refused to deal with it, and I just said it did. I just blocked it out basically for a long time, and then here it really is saying I couldn't say goodbye, and now it's 20 years, 18 years later, and I don't have to say goodbye, because it really was his spirit that spoke to me so clearly and that I loved so much, and I needn't say goodbye to that.
If you look back, you admired his ideals. Obviously, you admired him very much as a man and what he was hoping to achieve. Do you think he would cry with despair nowadays, looking at the way the world has gone?
Well, he was a clever man. He knew how the world was going then, and he did cry, and he also laughed, because I think those of us who've been deeply engaged in social political action have given up on crying in despair, because there's plenty there to cry in despair about 24 hours a day. So you look at the job to be done, which is, say, as large as the studio, you look what little tiny part you might be able to do. And with that in mind, you start, as the British would say, you bash on regardless.
Yes.
And in that tiny little space, do what you can. The despair comes if you look at the rest of it and think, why couldn't I have handled all of that as well?
He also achieved an astonishing victory, so it
Yes,
wasn't
he
a defeat
did.
for him.
I tell you what,
did.
we all know him, don't we, still?
Absolutely.
To this day. Look, it's sad to note on a note of despair, but in a way it's not. It's a note of hope as well. We've run out of time, Joan Baez.
I'm sorry, I've had a nice time.
Oh, good. I'm glad you have. Thanks
And
very
you
much.
smile a lot, as opposed to the pictures that depict you in your early days.
Well, I'm not as grim as I was
Oh,
then
you're
either.
no sense grim at all. You're gorgeous.
And Giles is still looking for the smutty bits.
No, I'm not. She writes like Proust in limpid translation. It's
Good.
wonderful.
Sid
It
Proust.
really is.
Good
Yes,
heavens.
It's fantastic. It reads like a novel. It's most exciting.
Yes,